All right, let's get straight to it. We're looking at Gaza today. After what, 10 weeks of a really tight
Yeah,
blockade?
that's right, 10 weeks. And now Israel says they'll let in a, quote, basic amount of food aid.
Basic amount. And this is happening just as warnings about, well, potential famine were getting louder.
Exactly. And Prime Minister Netanyahu's reasoning is interesting. He's basically saying a starvation crisis would get in the way of their military goals against Hamas.
So preventing a crisis to continue the offensive, that's quite a connection.
It really is. And you have to see it alongside the military actions themselves. Intensified ground operations, both north and south.
Yeah, and reports coming out are pretty grim. Airstrikes apparently disabling all 3 public hospitals.
That's what's being reported. And over 100 Palestinian deaths
Yeah.
just in the last day or so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the big question for this deep dive is why the change on aid now? And what does this basic aid actually mean for people there?
Well, let's look back at the blockade first. Israel's initial stance was pressure on Hamas. They accused Hamas of taking aid supplies.
An accusation Hamas denied. Right. And didn't aid groups push back?
They did. The UN, other agencies, they insisted they had strong supervision mechanisms to prevent diversion. So the whole justification was debated from the start.
And then came the international pressure, from the U.S. specifically.
Definitely seems like a factor. That, combined with those increasingly stark warnings about famine looming, it built up.
So it wasn't just an internal calculation by Israel.
Likely not solely, no.
Yeah.
But there's stated reason now avoiding a humanitarian crisis because it could jeopardize the military offensive. That's the official line. It really highlights this difficult intersection.
Military goals and humanitarian needs colliding. Okay, so this basic amount of aid, what are we talking about practically? Is aid getting through?
Well, that's the uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
We know when and how is still a bit unclear. But reportedly, there's a massive amount, like 116,000 metric tons of food just sitting at the crossings.
116,000 tons waiting.
So the supplies are physically there, it seems. The challenge is distribution inside Gaza, safely, effectively, especially with fighting ongoing.
And then there's this talk of a new aid system Israel wants to bring in later, something controversial.
Yes, a very controversial new aid mechanism is how it's being described. And the UN and humanitarian partners are strongly against it.
Calling it unethical and unworkable. Why such strong words? What's the fear?
I think the concerns are probably around fairness, equal access. Could this new system create more bottlenecks? Or could aid distribution become politicized?
And Israel framing the current UN aid deliveries as just temporary doesn't exactly build confidence.
Not at all. It adds a layer of instability. Meanwhile, the military operations haven't stopped. Heavy fighting north and south.
We're hearing about intense bombardments even near UN sites. And hospitals like Nusa Hospital.
The reports from Palestinian media are deeply concerning. Casualties, including children. There was one mention of a school housing displaced families being hit.
And the death toll. Over 100 in just the past day, you said, with dozens of children among them.
That's the figure being reported. It just underscores the terrible human cost.
And behind all this, the ceasefire talks seem stalled. There are indirect discussions happening in Qatar, but no breakthrough.
No signs of one currently, no. Not for a new ceasefire deal or for releasing the remaining Israeli hostages.
Which must make delivering even this basic aid incredibly difficult and dangerous.
Absolutely. The lack of a ceasefire makes everything more precarious. For aid workers, for civilians trying to get help, it's a feedback loop. The conflict worsens the crisis makes ending the conflict harder.
So it's an incredibly tangled situation. Israel allows some aid, possibly linked to military strategy and definitely under international pressure. But the fighting rages on, ceasefire talks are stuck, and the future of how aid even gets delivered is uncertain.
Precisely. You have urgent human need hitting up against military aims, political maneuvering, deep disagreements on aid logistics, and just ongoing tragedy.
So thinking about everything we've discussed, the reasons given for this policy shift, the realities on the ground, the stalled diplomacy, what do you think are the most critical things for you, the listener, to watch? What will really determine what happens next for the people in Gaza?